You know, the problem with instrument failure is that failing instruments just don't play fair. For instance, it would be nice if the gyro instruments would just immediately lay down and die. But no, the sad fact is that what they really do is start lying to you on their way out. For instance, the heading indicator may show erroneous heading information, and it may even start spinning, and the attitude indicator may lean over onto one side. And if you aren't careful, so will you. So when things get confusing, you need to put on your detective hat and start the troubleshooting procedures we talked about earlier to find out what has failed. Once you've determined that you indeed do have a failure, the key is to ignore the big liars. Now this is tough because most of the time you rely on them implicitly. But once you've identified those liars, it's a good idea to cover them up, say with a piece of paper or a sticky note if you can. If the static system fails, life is simple. Just use the alternate static source. But if you have a vacuum system failure, you're going to have to fly the airplane without the attitude indicator and the heading indicator. So let's talk about how you control the airplane with a vacuum system failure. Because you don't have all your instruments available to you, this is called flying partial panel. Obviously, the least challenging thing to do is fly straight and level. So let's start with that. For altitude control, not much has changed. You still have the altimeter as your primary pitch instrument and the VSI and airspeed indicator for support. The biggest problem is that you no longer have the attitude indicator to make those corrections. So you just have to get the information you need for pitch changes from your altimeter and your VSI. Your biggest challenge is with bank control, meaning heading control. As you remember, when the heading indicator fails, the magnetic compass becomes primary for bank in level flight, because it tells you if you're still on the heading you need to be on. But the turn coordinator is what you use to help hold that heading. If you keep the turn coordinator airplane level and the ball centered, you know that you aren't turning and that the wings are level. And by checking the magnetic compass, you can make sure that you're staying on your heading. But the magnetic compass can be really hard to use when you're turning or changing airspeed. You recall that your compass is only accurate if you are not turning near headings of north or south and not accelerating or decelerating near headings of east or west. So it's best to check your compass heading in straight and level, unaccelerated flight. If the magnetic compass tells you that you're off your heading, just use the turn coordinator to roll into a small correcting turn and then bring it back to level again. All the while, of course, you've got to keep your scan moving so that you don't get off altitude. Now, turns are the same as when you did timed turns before, except that you don't have the attitude indicator to help you roll into and out of them. So you'll have to use the turn coordinator and the magnetic compass instead. For climbs and descents with vacuum system failure, instead of using the attitude indicator for pitch control during changes, use the altimeter and VSI. So, even if you do have a complete vacuum system failure, you'll be able to control the airplane safely on instruments because you will have been trained to fly on partial panel.